Eventually, I felt like it was time to make a shift into a more Middle Eastern-based business. Again, we were covering Asia, predominantly Japan. About 50% of our placements are overseas placements. So for anyone looking to come from overseas, it's absolutely an opportunity for you. You do not have to be in the Middle East.
Should they add a picture of themselves on the CV?
No. Those types of profiles generally are less attractive to the family office world, despite the fact that they are, I suppose, top tier talent.
New dream is not the American dream, it's actually the GCC dream.
You're attending family dinners, you're attending weddings, you are a part of the family, you are fully responsible for managing the wealth and growing the wealth of that person.
Shawaly Show.
Welcome back to the Shawaly Show. Today we have a very special guest with us, George Sames, Managing Director of Oneira Talent, a recruitment powerhouse featured in Bloomberg and Arabian Business. George and his team help financial services firms across the GCC attract and hire exceptional talent, from sovereign wealth funds and private equity groups to fintech innovators and family offices. In this episode, we'll dive into the realities of Dubai's job market, explore how international professionals can pivot into the region, and uncover what recruiters are really looking for in future leaders. Welcome, George. How are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Moses.
Yeah, how's it going? Did you guys get impacted by what happened yesterday in Doha?
To this point, no. Hopefully not moving forwards either. Dubai is quite a different place to where I originally come from in the UK, and that news is not as probably widely discussed. So we'll see things through some social media platforms, but generally speaking, it's not thrown in your face in the same way it might be on the BBC News or the CNN News. So no, there's not been a huge amount of discussion. It's only been 24 hours, right? But hopefully that's not something that's going to impact us too much moving forwards.
Yeah, that's very good. I was worried, actually. People were maybe worried about, since you live close to Doha, businesses were impacted, or it affected the vibe, the entrepreneurial maybe spirits in the city. But
yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, look, certainly there's always an impact and a knock-on effect from any anything like that, and I'm sure particularly for international businesses in the region, it will always cause some kind of concern, rightly so. I would like to think it's not going to affect things too badly moving forwards. UAE tends to be quite insulated in terms of some of the other activity across the Middle East, albeit so is Qatar usually. So hopefully, again, that's not something that's going to be too much of an issue moving forwards for anybody.
Yeah, exactly. Well, George, your story is very interesting. You're living the dream of many Brits right now. You left the UK to go to Dubai and to co-start a company that's currently working with different offices, family offices in the region. Can we back up and can you tell us how it all started and why did you choose that part of the world to set shop?
Yeah, for sure. So I've been in the Middle East now for 5 years. So I was in London originally. My whole life I wanted to be in London up until getting there when I was 21, 22. I spent a couple of years in a sales role in the UK and loved my time there. The difficulty came when COVID hit, actually, and obviously it was a tricky time for everybody. I'd been in London, a year and a half, 2 years by that point. And naturally COVID was difficult, right? And going from a big, bustling sales office to suddenly, working at home, isolated was pretty tricky. My partner at the time was absolutely desperate to get out of the UK. She was not originally from the UK. And once COVID hit, we kind of decided, if we're going to make a move, now's probably the time to start looking at options. So I spent some time, again, during that COVID period, looking at jobs in the Middle East, looking at jobs in Dubai, in exactly the same position that I'm now, helping a lot of the candidates that I talk to that are in. So I understand firsthand just how tricky that can be when you're outside of the region and trying to, understand what the region looks like, how the region works, how to land a role here. which has all been quite valuable in what it is I'm now doing. Eventually landed a role which was a kind of technology sales role here in Dubai. Unfortunately, didn't work out pretty early on. I'm sure, unfortunately, as many people within my network will know, visas and your company applying for visas can it's a bit of a grey area sometimes for particularly kind of maybe smaller or unknown entities. And within, I think it was a month, I decided to move on from that role. So I had a really kind of rocky start to my time in the Middle East. Landed another role in sales. I was actually with Property Finder. I'm sure many people will know. Property Finder's been in the news a lot recently. They've recently, one of their big investors exited, and they've actually just had another very large investor, a big US, asset management private equity firm, invest a huge amount of capital into the business. But I spent a year with Property Finder in a kind of sales role, and I was selling media packages there. So my role was to be engaging with real estate CEOs, people setting up new real estate brokerages and advising on what media package they should be taking. It was great. It wasn't really what I wanted to do long term. Long story short, it was a funny story. My kind of route into recruitment, I think a lot of people tend to kind of fall into recruitment, and it was the same for me. Of all places, I was at Atlantis Water Park, which people in this region will know, and ended up queuing an hour for a slide, as you do when you're at Atlantis Water Park. And a couple of people in front of me in the queue was actually a guy that I used to work with in the UK. So Michael, if you're listening, hello. Michael and I spent a couple of years working together for the business that I was working with in London. Long story short, him and his brother ran a recruitment business, which was actually based in Japan. So over the course of a few conversations and a couple of weeks, I ended up exiting Property Finder into this recruitment role. And that really kind of rolled, it's where the ball started rolling on my recruitment career. Eventually, I felt like it was time to make a shift into a more Middle Eastern based business. Again, we were covering Asia, predominantly Japan. So shifting, to cover a local market, given that I was based in Dubai, is what I wanted to do. Ended up joining another recruitment firm based here in Dubai, before then making the decision to launch Oneira Talent earlier on in the year, having built a few years worth of experience in the industry. So that's my path into recruitment and how ultimately Oneira was created.
Wow, that's very interesting. It feels like fortune favors the brave. You were brave enough to leave your comfort base in London, moved to a new country that maybe you didn't know much about, and then you kept moving from one position to the other till you started your own business. Well, I guess it's not always easy to start a business, because first you're not known in the market, and then you need to work your way up. How was your journey there, and how did you land your first clients? How did you earn their trust to start with?
Yeah, for sure. So I think that's probably the first thing to mention is the Middle East is recruitment is a relationship game. Ultimately, it's the whole nature of the business, and there's all sorts of talk around, I suppose, how recruitment will evolve and whether AI will take over some aspects of it. But ultimately, we're in the people business, right? So relationships are literally your kind of bread and butter. So building relationships from the start is crucial. And I learned that very early on in my previous recruitment role before I started the current business. Having only ever covered Japan before, the Middle East was a completely different beast. And, the Arabic culture of having, very personalized one-to-one relationships with people, really spans broader than just, with Arabic clients, right? It becomes a kind of blanket culture within the region overall. So, a lot of coffee meetings, a lot of, walking meetings, maybe through the DIFC, a lot of time kind of nurturing relationships, and ultimately, relationships take time to build, right? So, unlike maybe, recruiting for the UK or sometimes recruiting for Japan, where you can very quickly, meet a potential client and turn that into a client and end up working roles for the business. I found very early on that the Middle East is slightly different in that, again, everything is relationship based. Obviously, that comes with challenges in that it takes time to build those relationships and to nurture those relationships and get to the point where, for example, a family office principal is happy to do business with you. And that's ultimately, where we now are. But also there's enormous benefits to that sort of culture, because, you know, when it comes to things like referrals or introductions, it's a snowball effect. If you can build relationships with the right people, those can grow very, very quickly. I have a couple of clients that I'm actually currently working with. Both of those initial relationships came from a previous client I was working with, and, you know, as I said, it's a case of coffee meetings and lunches and various different methods of engaging with different people. But yeah, networking is absolutely key, and we can come onto this as well in a moment. But from a candidate perspective, that notion doesn't change for people searching for a role, and I share that with everybody that we speak to. So yeah, networking is number one, particularly for the Middle East.
No, you're totally right. And that's actually something that many companies businesses that we talk with in the West, especially, sometimes they are not aware of, and they think that you don't really have to nourish this part, the relationships. And so the human part is very important in the Middle East. Maybe at the beginning, it takes a long time to get started, because, you know, you need to build trust. But once they trust you, it's, as you mentioned, it's a snowball effect. Things, you know, they trust you, so they give you work automatically. You're the first person or the first company that pops up in their heads, so they send you they send you, like, you know, the work they're looking for. That's very interesting. Perfect. But so obviously when you're okay, so you mentioned AI as well, so you're really, you know, you're leading us into this rabbit hole of AI. But let's talk about AI. Are you guys currently using AI? Because I feel sometimes, and, you know, you talk to people, and many candidates, especially on LinkedIn, you know, some people reach out and they say, yeah, or you see their comments or on my posts, and they don't like AI because they feel like it's not fair to be judged by a machine. So how do you guys work with AI? Do you even use it or not?
We do. I would say we're certainly in the early stages of adoption, and the AI that I'm going to mention here, Moses, is far from high-tech AI. It's probably the most basic form of AI. I think, you know, similar to every person on Earth at the moment, we use ChatGPT all day, every day, for all sorts of different things. Whether it's, you know, just giving me a second opinion on a contract, or you know, if I'm sending an incredibly important email, yes, we still get, you know, ChatGPT double checks things for us, of course. From an actual recruiting perspective, to a degree, we use AI. What we don't do is use a kind of large scale, I suppose, ATS type system that automatically will filter out candidates. I speak to a lot of candidates that I think assume maybe they've, you know, applied to a role, and perhaps, you know, again, given the volume, sometimes they haven't heard directly from us. And I think people are always slightly scared, and they should rightly be, because of a lot of corporates and companies now do, that the CV is automatically thrown to the side because it hasn't ticked a certain box or hasn't mentioned a certain word. We don't use that. We try to, one of our kind of core pillars as a business is we try to be as kind of, you know, personalized and bespoke as possible. And ultimately, we're a smaller boutique business. We cover a very niche space within quite a niche market within a relatively small, you know, city/country. We cover a couple of other countries as well, but, you know, the actual location we cover is small, right? So what that means is we can afford a little bit more than maybe some, you know, very large international multi-vertical recruitment businesses, to be a little bit more one-on-one with candidates. So we don't utilize AI to that degree. We do, of course, run, you know, I suppose, online marketing material and outreach to some of our clients, and a lot of that is often utilizing some sort of automated system. I think recruitment will certainly move in that direction. We are seeing, not to a massive degree, but it's certainly become, I suppose, part of the conversation within the recruitment scene, a potential fear to some degree that some businesses will actually, rather than use recruitment agencies, start to implement their own AI systems to source and hire talent. Of course, as a recruiter, I would argue that there's certainly, you know, disadvantages to doing that, as opposed to having a real person running your processes for you. But yeah, of course, I think we'll probably start to adopt more and more AI initiatives. As I said, we're in the very early stages of that, and we use very basic AI tools that I think probably most people are familiar with. So we're getting there. We're not probably, utilizing the most complex tools in the world, but we're trying to leverage where we can so we can maximize our recruitment activity.
Yeah, but those who use those tools, how do you think the screening AI tools work? Like, can you give us an idea? Like, does that AI look at keywords in the CV or the format? How does it work? And what would be your tips to maybe bypass it, or manage to get to the next step despite everything?
So I've got a relatively good insight on that from my time back in the UK. So when I mentioned the couple of years I spent in the UK, my roles, we were actually, I was in the sales team we sold events, and we sold different types of events, but one of those events was HR tech. And naturally within any HR tech event, there's a segment within HR tech that's always going to be related to hiring or recruitment. There's various other technologies, such as ways that you can engage your employees, or ways that you can measure employee satisfaction. This all falls within the category of HR tech, and we would sell to vendors that had these kind of solutions. Within the recruitment side, there are so many different tools that are directly sold to employers, and there are certainly employers that utilize them. There are tools that will automatically scan the market for available talent, so that the employer is not having to use whatever job portal they might use, or if they want to try and avoid recruitment fees, that is an available option. It's still a relatively expensive option, but allows them to run things in-house. We've seen tools that interview candidates. So the candidate will be sent in an auto link, and they join the auto link, and there'll quite literally be someone that AI interviews the candidate based on the responses, based on keywords, may or may not pass. And I think this is one of the challenges with AI. I think there's some amazing tools out there, and I think over time, as they develop, it will certainly favor not just the employers, but also hopefully the recruiters can benefit from that, rather than be made redundant by the tools. Right. But I do think there's a missing human element there, which is always, I suppose, my pitch to new clients, right? Which is that we understand people and their motivations and what they've actually really done, rather than whether they ticked the keyword box on their CV. Yeah. Believe it or not everyone has the best CV in the world, but we're hopefully good enough to recognize a good person. And that's where AI would have the disadvantage. But yeah, there's an awful lot of tech out there, and almost on a weekly basis, you'll see a new HR tech on LinkedIn. So I'm curious to see what direction that goes.
Yeah, maybe AI is good, useful for an initial screening. The very basic, just to make sure that because of course, I'm sure you get spammed a lot, or maybe you get many CVs that have nothing to do with the job. I was wondering as well, your clients, if you go tell them I'm running everything by AI, it's AI that does maybe they wouldn't be happy about it, right? So that's why they're hiring a company to do the job.
Correct. Yeah, correct. We tend to see, I'm really generalizing here, but a lot of employees tend to go in one of two directions. The bigger, more corporate employers, we're talking huge international banks or big international corporate businesses, tend to be the ones that naturally have the budgets for huge technology integrations and AI integrations. And a lot of the time, that will be a longer term play for them to ultimately, whilst it's expensive at the start, maybe start to downsize on things like recruitment costs or hiring TA people within the business. On the flip side, the clients that we work with most frequently, again, particularly in this part of the world where the volume of these types of businesses is higher, when you look at the family office space, for example, a family office by nature is incredibly, again, I'm generalizing because you see all types of examples, but generally speaking, very non-institutional. It's ultimately the boss is a family member, right? It's family wealth, and no matter how big some of these businesses can get, and no matter how many portfolio businesses they have, and you'll see some of the big Emirati holding groups in Dubai have hundreds of portfolio companies. Ultimately, the people at the top they're a family, right? It's a non-corporate business to a degree, and those businesses, and therefore those clients that ultimately we end up working with, really value having a human and a personal touch, and for us to almost become an extended member of the family. And our sole responsibility is talent, but ultimately, as this region's become more and more competitive, and hiring really top tier talent and retaining top tier talent has become more and more difficult. Those types of businesses really value what we're able to offer them. We find a lot of the time whenever we are onboarding a new client, particularly a family office, for example, one of the challenges that those businesses often face is they almost have blinkers in terms of their visibility on talent, and they tend to know who they know, and they know their own network, and they know who works at maybe one of their cousins' family offices, but they don't have visibility to the full market. And because again they're usually a little bit less forward thinking when it comes to the technology side, and maybe even basic things like job portals, right? And trust me, a job portal, if you're an employer, is probably not the best way to onboard your talent. It's one method. But again, they value the visibility we're able to offer them, and actually the one-to-one consultative side of things, because a lot of these guys have never built an investment team before. They might have one person that looks after their personal wealth. Once they want to institutionalize just a little bit, and they want to have a guy that looks after private equity and a girl that looks after public markets, and they've never had this, that's when we love to step in and genuinely operate as a consultant to them and say, look, we've just finished this project with this family office, helping them to hire XYZ. This is the typical structure. This is what we would recommend. At that point, of course, there's external conversations that had outside of us, but we operate, I would like to think, as a genuinely valuable consultant to them, and help to place some really, top tier talent at those businesses. My point being, again, the types of businesses we work with really value that relationship, as opposed to, recruitment software XYZ. That's going to send them a couple of CVs, right? So that's where we see real traction.
Yeah. Exactly, and it makes sense. You're in the human business, so if they're hiring humans, they need a human to do the quality control. So to me, right, you can't just delegate it to a machine. At least not the full process.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, 100%.
What are those family offices looking for when it comes to the top candidates, the top candidates you're hiring, beyond the technical skills?
Sure. Yeah, sure. So family offices are quite a unique beast, to put it that way. They are, again, they're very non-corporate. So the typical, if we were to use the opposite end of the spectrum and we were to look at one of the big sovereign wealth funds, those guys love to hire, at the moment, the trend seems to be from the UK, the top UK banks and the M&A bankers within those businesses, not necessarily British people, but they like the fact that people have been in a big, financial hubs such as London. Those types of profiles generally are less attractive to the family office world, despite the fact that they are, I suppose, top tier talent. The reason for that, family offices, one, their mandates again are far less. They're typically less institutional. Their investment style is going to be much more, I suppose, vanilla to a degree. Again, we see different examples of this. They tend to prefer, a lot of the time, talent on the ground. That's one pattern we do see. We've placed several people from overseas into regional family offices, but one of the things that's generally quite valued is, an understanding of how the region works, an understanding of actually deploying capital into the region. Naturally, again, if you're working directly with a family and they're a local family or wherever they might be from, having that familiarity with, I suppose, the culture of the business and the people is generally appreciated. The point I'm trying to make there is, if you're working for JP Morgan, to be honest, understanding the culture of Dubai is probably less important, right? Because you're with a big glass door institution. It's much more global in its footprint and its exposure. Of course, they have domestic teams as well. Point being, the family office teams tend to really like people that understand the region. Culture is number one for those businesses. I've had candidates interview Moses for family offices that are bang on spec. They fit the template perfectly. Yeah, they've invested into the right asset classes, and they can talk on par with the chief investment officer, really high level, top tier talent. If the family principal doesn't like them or can't have a conversation with them, feels like the culture doesn't align, it's a no-go. So culture is absolutely number one. The other challenge sometimes we come across within the family office space, particularly moving someone from one family office to the other, because of, again, sometimes a lack of, they're non-institutional, even basic things like, reference checks, right? If you come from a really unknown, non-branded family office, and a lot of the businesses here look like that, by the way, they're asked, employees shouldn't put the name of the company on their LinkedIn.
Confidential, you see this confidential in Saudi and
correct.
Emirates.
Yeah, correct. Don't tell anyone.
Everything is confidential. Yeah.
If you ask anyone the name of the family who's wealthy managing, please keep it to yourself. AUM is completely non-disclosed. Suddenly, if you're wanting a new role and the employer's asking for reference checks, we've faced challenges with that before, and the candidate's not happy to even ask for a reference from their employer because it's all totally anonymous. So family office recruitment is really nuanced. I love recruiting for that space because of the personability of it, and ultimately
it's very niche as well.
100%, and it's a really covert.
How do you deal with this? I mean, you're supposed to actually to know the background of the candidate, but the candidate cannot tell you where he's been. Like, how do you do your due diligence, and how do you double check?
Yeah, sure. So that's when it comes back down to relationships, right? I won't claim to know every single family office in the Middle East because I don't. There are thousands of them, but we know the main players, and we know through those players a lot of the players associated to them. We have a really expansive network. So having those relationships, knowing the businesses, knowing the principals, understanding the investment mandates, is key for that exact example, and actually just working within that space in general is key. Being able to demonstrate to a family principal that you have actually helped another principal to build out an office before. You understand what the typical patterns look like within an asset allocation and a risk appetite within a family office, which is very different to a very institutional business, and that always comes across well as well. If we're trying to if we're having a conversation with a new business that we're trying to onboard as a client, and we can prove that we understand that space really well, we understand who's in that space, despite the fact that you won't find them on LinkedIn, it helps us, and is just essential to be able to recruit for that part of the market.
Do you think they are competitive? There's some kind of competition or competitiveness between the different family offices there, given that the limited number of top talent? Or also when it comes to privacy, because I'm thinking maybe some family offices don't want to have don't want to recruit somebody, and then that someone might leave with the inner secrets and take them somewhere else to another family office. How do you guys deal with that?
So to answer the first part of your question, yes and no. One of the difficulties about recruiting for a family office is actually, compared to bigger, more institutional businesses, the lifespan of an employee within that business tends to be pretty long, as long as they have a good relationship with the family. Naturally, again, because of the nature of the position itself, because of the business itself. I mean, if we look, for example, at a more senior role, so if you're a chief investment officer within a family office, you report to the guy that has the money. You have a direct relationship, and you quite literally become an extended part of family. You're attending family dinners, you're attending weddings, you are a part of the family. You are fully responsible for managing the wealth and growing the wealth of that person. Naturally, unless you're doing a terrible job, or unless you mess up, those people tend to stay around for a pretty long time. So we tend to see that, of course, there's still a decent volume of the roles for us to work, given the number of family offices in the region. But each business is unlikely to be hiring a senior person that frequently for that exact reason, which is people stay. Which is great. I mean, it's great for the business, and what it does allow us to do is help recruit at maybe a more junior or mid level, because you can build such a relationship with the CIO or the principal, because they stick around. It's difficult when people move every couple of years, because you have to build a relationship with their new entity and their new business. So I hope that answers your question. Sorry, I can't remember of what you asked there.
So the second one. So we talked about competition between the different offices, and whether if they are competitive between them. The different offices. Okay, what are the big don'ts when it comes to to recruitment, or if you're trying to get a job with a family office, you go to, I guess there's an interview. Well, first they meet with you guys, and then they meet the family office. What are the things that they need to be aware of before a first interview? What's the best way to give a good impression?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, taking, are we talking specifically about family offices?
Yeah, because it's very niche actually, and I think many people would be interested in knowing more about it. Yeah, so we were talking, the connection dropped. We were talking about family offices since it's very niche, and I think this might be one of the first interviews online that talk specifically about recruitment for family offices.
Sure.
And the question was, what are the typical mistakes that maybe people who are not familiar with this part of the world or with this specific niche are make?
Yeah, for sure. It's a really good question. So, the first thing is the point we touched around before, which is the cultural side of things. I think it's really important, depending on, you should go into the interview, and obviously this is partly the responsibility of the recruiter that you are dealing with, fully aware of, who that family is, what is the background of the family, where are the family from, and ultimately be respectful of, whatever that family culture is. Again, if you go into the interview treating that like a corporate interview, that's where you're less likely to see success for some of the reasons we mentioned before. That point alone around, if you treat this like a corporate interview process, that could almost be a kind of second bullet point of, again, not what not to do. You need to be really cautious of the relationship you're building throughout the interview process, and be asking questions around, not just the transactions that these guys are running through from an M&A perspective, perhaps, but actually, about the family and the culture and the working environment, which is all so essential for that type of business. Not only for the reasons we've mentioned before, Moses, but actually just a lot of time because of the scale of the business as well. The majority of, there are some very large family offices that I could quote you, that are 50 people, 100 people, but the vast majority are actually quite small. And it's not unusual to see, the family sits at the top, and then you've got the chief investment officer or investment director, and then maybe a couple of analysts, or maybe, in some cases, one analyst. So, if you don't fit into that group, it's going to stand out like a sore thumb. So making sure how these guys operate, what day-to-day looks like, how you can be culturally aligned to the business and their work ethics, is so important. And you don't want to make that blatant, but I think asking the recruiter questions, understanding the background of the family, a lot of the time, family offices take all sorts of shapes and sizes, but a lot of the time in this region, the family principals tend to have an operating business. And then the investment entity will kind of sit on the side of that, right? So if I can give a very broad example of, let's say AW Rostamani that everyone's heard of, right? Huge Emirati operating business. They own all the car dealerships, and they've got several businesses. And ultimately, the family manage their own wealth in a separate entity outside of that. But understanding operating businesses and, what the family does is so important, and asking questions around that rather than just, what's your AUM? When was your last transaction? How many transactions do you run a year is really important. So I think that's a really important push. Similarly to that is the conversation around compensation. Ultimately, for any candidate, compensation's important. I think anyone that says they don't care at all about it would be lying, and hopefully employees are aware enough to know that throughout the interview process, the candidate is going to want to know how much they're going to be paid, of course. I think when you're interviewing with someone to manage their personal wealth, or maybe not directly with them, but through their management team, it's good to tread carefully and to, again, make sure you're creating a really personable impression rather than treat this like a corporate interview. I think, making sure that you create that impression is really important. And then the last point I would probably make is somewhat related to that, is around progression. A lot of the time, I'm not saying I don't want to create a false cause and effect here, because it's actually not the case. But I used the example earlier around, M&A bankers in the UK, for example, fitting really well into the sovereigns or the big asset managers. we tend to place less of them into family offices. The main reason is not because of the point I'm making, but actually it's somewhat tied. Within the corporate world, you're going to probably be up for your promotion cycle once a year and your pay cycle once a year. And within Big Four, it's the same story. And within lots of corporate environments, it's the same story. In the family office world, you're more than likely going to have no idea. There's going to be no path set out for you. Everything is done on this discretionary basis. Everything is based on your relationship. Everything is based on what you've achieved for, the office, and therefore what you can probably expect in return in terms of, a remuneration increase or asking for a higher title. It's a bit more of a kind of push and pull rather than just expecting to be from analyst to associate to senior associate to every year.
That's not how it works, right? Like titles are not as important. It's a small structure. Right. And what you need to focus on is maybe building trust. So you're working more on trust, and trust comes from the personal side, but also from work. They need to see the results or the impact of the work you're delivering, I guess.
Sure, 100%. All down to trust, all down to relationship building. I think the overarching theme there is, whilst of course you're being employed for your hard skills and your ability to do the job, your soft skills during the interview process are going to be, emphasized more than they probably will be in any other working environment, particularly I'm talking about the family office space, right, for all the reasons that I've mentioned there. So I think emphasizing on your soft skills and your personability and your humbleness and your willingness to align with culture and willingness to build relationships and build trust and be with the business for a long time and demonstrate all of that is ultimately what will, massively increase your chances of success when interviewing with those types of entities, as opposed to assuming that because you've been with XYZ logo on your CV, you probably get the job, which is not the case in that environment. I think it's a really distinctive, separation between the family office world and the more institutional world.
So it sounds like, you just need to have the minimum skills required for the job, but then they need to see you and trust you and like you. Which maybe makes sense. I mean, if you have a small business, you want chemistry to be right. And even like a lot of business gurus out there are talking a lot about, how important it is to work with people you like.
Sure, 100%. And I mean, to your point, that certainly the skills are absolutely still important. And around minimum skills probably still going to make it tough for you, right? They still want good people, but they want good people with the right attitude and, the right approach to their work. And again, I've generalized throughout the probably last 10 minutes or so, but the family office is coming all sorts of shapes and sizes. I'm referring here to probably the kind of what I'd call the SME style family office, which is the majority of the market. We do see, and I'm aware of a few businesses that are on paper family offices because they manage family wealth, but they are really big and institutional and have really kind of complex investment strategies, maybe kind of trading strategies outside of the more vanilla side that maybe some of the smaller businesses that will run. And those guys, in fairness, sometimes do hire from some of the more institutional entities that I referred to previously. So there's no hard and fast rule, but again, just as a rule of thumb, where actually probably 80% of the market's going to sit anyway, which is what I've been referring to, tend to sit along those lines.
Yeah. What are the perks of working for a family office, and why would someone, choose a family office rather than go to work with, big Deloitte or other consulting companies?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, the first thing is the opportunity to build a relationship. I have candidates that I speak to on a daily basis across Saudi, across the UAE, that might report into the principal or maybe the son or daughter of the principal, and those principals are sometimes royal family, or they might be incredibly wealthy, well-known people, and you have the opportunity to ultimately be in that same environment with those individuals, which in itself can present all sorts of opportunities for you on a personal level if you have exactly the relationship that we were talking about before.
The right attitude as well.
100%, yeah. And all of a sudden that kind of promotion scale that I mentioned before, which maybe some people see as a negative, is then a huge positive, because actually there's zero ceiling. If you have a one-to-one relationship with a family principal that's got a team running, I don't know, $1 billion under management. He's or he or she's a very influential person, and ultimately, in terms of the opportunities that can lead to across the remainder of your career with them, is I think an amazing opportunity. So that's definitely a plus point. I've tried to headhunt candidates out of businesses where the candidate has an exceptional relationship with that principal, and they've said no, regardless of the opportunity. I have such a strong relationship with this person, and I have such, I suppose, unconditional trust with that person that I just wouldn't leave business. And I think, whilst it's sometimes frustrating for me not to be able to headhunt that person, it's a fantastic position to be in, particularly given, again, I suppose, who those people sometimes are. That's one of the beauties about the Middle East as well, is the exposure you have to, I suppose, the successful people. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I suppose, would be around work-life balance. If you have come from a corporate banking environment and you're moving into a family office, your hours are going to be a lot nicer. It's going to be a much more comfortable working environment. Ultimately, you're still doing important work, but moving away, from that very corporate space into a much more, I don't want to say casual, but probably slightly more informal environment when it comes to corporate structure is quite nice. And generally, it's one of the points that would be a real selling point if we're moving someone from one of those, corporate institutions.
Maybe less slavery, like I had to mention that actually word, because it feels like, according to what you're saying, they are willing to invest in you and your family and take care of you as long as you show genuine willing to invest, settle down in the region, and take care of their business.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100%.
Okay, so you mentioned Saudi Arabia. What's going on right now? So, Saudi Arabia is a booming powerhouse in the region.
Yeah.
Do you see any, how are you guys dealing with the candidates? Like, where to go if you were to get advice?
For sure. So interestingly, before we started Oneira, I'd covered Saudi to a degree, but not massively. Since starting the business, we're probably about 60% focused on Saudi. So more than half of our work is now Saudi Arabia. The opportunity in Saudi, for, I suppose, candidates and indirectly for us, ultimately in terms of hiring opportunities, is enormous. It's a tricky market, and it certainly takes a while to kind of navigate that market. We've spent several months mapping out the Saudi Arabian market and understanding who the main players are, and ultimately building relationships in the same way that I mentioned before, which is not easy. It certainly takes time, but the Saudi market is absolutely booming. You see headlines around challenges with some of the for example, Neom or some of the PIF projects when it comes to funding, which is of course true, but the general trend seems to be upwards in terms of new businesses coming into the region. Ultimately, the available capital in Saudi. I put a post onto LinkedIn probably a couple of months back now, saying I think Saudi is probably the closest thing we'll ever see to infinite capital. It seems that for the right project, the money's always there.
Exactly.
To a degree.
And the size of the country as well. It's 4 times the size of France, for example. It's huge, unlimited energy.
100%. Yeah, 100%. So we've gone really bullish on Saudi in terms of the time spent and the resources spent on developing a presence in the KSA. Where we've seen most traction in Saudi, one is, Riyadh's an obvious thing to say. It's kind of Riyadh's the hub of everything finance in Saudi at the moment. We also do a lot of work in Jeddah, as well as some of the kind of broader cities. We talk the likes of kind of Dammam or Al-Khabar. We have several clients across the region now. Saudi is an interesting one in that, compared to the UAE, where of course you do have an initiative to hire UAE nationals, it's far the initiative's far less strong than it is in Saudi. So at the moment in Saudi, for specific roles or for specific designations, usually a more junior to mid-level, Saudi nationals are in really high demand.
Even for the family offices, or you're talking in general now?
less so for the family office space, more
Yeah.
for the more institutional space where there's more, I suppose, regimented, requirements from some of the regulators. But yeah, junior to mid-level Saudi nationals are in enormous demand, which creates its own challenges for a recruitment firm. Ultimately, when you have someone who everybody wants, if they're good, it's not unusual to see some of the young Saudi guys, and they've got 10 offers in their hands, and they're just choosing which one they want, and then move in 3 months anyway, which again can cause all sorts of issues. But I mean, it's great for them, and the country's on an enormous growth trajectory. For the expat market, where we spend probably half our time in Saudi, there's also enormous opportunity. Saudi nationals, again, are in quite high demand for several roles, but at the same time, we work, you'll have probably seen some of my roles on LinkedIn recently, Moses. We've got some roles that are very much open to expat candidates. And we've placed several people into Saudi from the likes of London. I had a gentleman join from Germany not too long ago. So the market's really hot, and I think that trend will just go upwards. And we're actually continuing to focus more and more time into the Saudi market. I will be in Saudi in about 2 weeks' time to visit some clients over there. So we're going hard on KSA.
Well, speaking of which sectors are the hottest right now in the region, in the peninsula? I know you work mainly in finance, so or are you working in other sectors as well? Are you diversifying? And
sure. So we are broadly branded as financial services. We are mostly investment management. So the vast majority of our clients are, private equity businesses, family offices, asset management firms, so on and so forth, leaning primarily towards private markets. So anyone that's investing in private capital into various different asset classes tend to be our primary clients. In terms of the hot areas within those sectors, and to answer your question, Moses, private markets in broad spectrum of financial services is where all the activity seems to be happening at the moment. Of course, there are several hedge funds here. There's hedge funds that have moved to the region. There are several banks in the region, and we actually have a few banking clients, which is why I said we're mostly, on the investment management side. But private markets is really where most of the activity seems to be in terms of private equity, venture capital, so on and so forth. Within that world, the two hot areas that we're seeing at the moment is the front office investment team, which is typically always an area of interest. It's really the bread and butter of what we cover. So we're talking, investment analysts, investment associates, VPs, up to director or chief investment officer level. And then the second area where we've seen the most traction this year is sales. So we're talking fundraisers. I don't think it's any secret. Anyone that knows anything about investment management or finance in the Middle East will know that everyone wants to raise money from the Middle East. So almost every business we talk to, whether they have a live mandate to hire the person or not, we're often asked, if you know anyone that you can introduce to us that can help us raise X million from, sovereign wealth fund X, Y, and Z, private equity firm X, Y, and Z, that knows this high net worth, individual that can raise money, that's in huge demand, and it's been that way for a while. Everybody wants to raise
everyone,
capital.
everywhere.
The challenge is everyone wants to raise capital from the same people. It's become more and more tricky, but we cover an enormous amount of either institutional sales roles, high net worth sales roles, or other types of kind of business development, relationship management type positions. Those are the two kind of core areas that we're focused on at the moment.
That's amazing, actually. Every time we talk about something, it just leads to more questions, and it feels like it's very interesting. Let's take a couple of questions from our audience. Sure. I have here David asking, David from the US, how can experienced US-based professionals pivot into Dubai or the region, GCC, without prior regional connections? Many talented folks have the skills, but not the local network. Curious how recruiters view that.
Yeah, sure. It's a good question. So the first elephant in the room there is US. Maybe that's an unfair way of putting it. We don't see that many US citizens in the Middle East. It's a really small, part of the population. A large reason for that is that US citizens continue to pay US tax once they come here, and they're one of, if I'm not mistaken, one of the only nationalities that does that. So I think for that reason alone, there's not so many US citizens here. Having said that, obviously, in terms of the private equity world and the asset management world, some of the biggest, most well-known players globally are US firms. What's really helped, I think, to answer David's question, potentially with someone like him wanting to move over, is the fact that that's been happening. So there are, several US private equity managers, several US asset managers that have set up shop in the DIFC, the ADGM, really kind of contributed towards the continued globalization of this region, and have really dragged with them, even more international talent that was already looking to than what was already looking to come to the region. So the opportunity is certainly there. To give you a broader answer on probably an unrelated, somewhat unrelated question, about 50% of our placements are overseas placements. So for anyone looking to come from overseas, it's absolutely an opportunity for you. You do not have to be in the Middle East, including the US. It's no different for someone like David. To answer the question more broadly, I don't think there's really any need to do anything massively different or specific because he's in the US. If that's what the question was kind of angled from. I think for anyone wanting to come to the region, I think I would generally give the same advice, which is that, one, networking is going to be key from the start. So building a solid network of recruiters. I would love for everyone to come directly to me and only to come to me. But ultimately, if I was him, I'd be reaching out to probably, 3, 5, 6, whatever it might be, recruiters in the region, and just trying to have a conversation, start to build a network. That might lead to a broader network or introductions, or even a couple of, even if they're not formal interviews, might be able to introduce you to someone on the ground that might be interested to have a chat, and that can, that can snowball. So I think networking from the start is key. LinkedIn's the best place to do that. As a recruiter, LinkedIn is not the only tool that we use, but it's where we probably spend the majority of the time, whether it's posting on LinkedIn or messaging on LinkedIn or searching for candidates on LinkedIn. It's sometimes difficult with the volume of candidates, as you can imagine.
You must be bombarded by.
So if David tries to message me 4 times and I miss one of the messages, please don't keep messaging me, and that's fine. But building that network slowly but surely is going to be number one and key.
And be patient as well. Patience, I guess.
Patience, 100%. Yeah, 100%. Why again, reaching out to maybe more than one person is probably recommended. Secondly, on that same topic, is making sure your LinkedIn is up to scratch. I actually put a post about this on LinkedIn myself, again, probably 2 or 3 months ago. If you are a job hunter, or you're searching for a role, especially if you're actively searching for a role, maybe it's different if you don't really want to be approached, but if you're actively searching for a role, your LinkedIn needs to be up to scratch. Every recruiter, if you message them, if you email them, if you meet them in the street, the first thing they're going to do once they have your name is probably look you up on LinkedIn. They want to see, not already got your CV, they want to see your background, what you've been doing, what you're doing at the moment. Just make sure, basics, have a description of each of your roles under each position. I always say to everyone, make sure you have a photo. Sometimes it can feel like we're being messaged by a ghost.
Exactly. About.
Yeah, it's a really tiny thing, but it can potentially help just with a personalization element. And then, simple things like your, just underneath your name, excuse me, just underneath your name is your headline. I always recommend that someone's headline should be, as clearly as they possibly can, and as concise as they possibly can, what they do, and what segment they might be covering. So for example, if you work for a GCC family office and you're covering, local private equity investments, maybe your title should, your heading should say investment associate, Dubai family office. I think all of these small little things that, will catch a recruiter's eye within the minute they see your profile are really important, because we see so many profiles a day. If you're doing all of your networking and your LinkedIn is just, an empty grey box, it's really not going to help your efforts. So just spend, half an hour putting that together, watch a couple of videos, just work out how you can maximize, your LinkedIn overall. And I think that's my general, really basic, hopefully not patronizing advice to anyone wanting to come here. Networking is absolutely key. And I don't think being from the US, will make any difference to that. So,
you don't discriminate against Americans just because you're British yourself. So it's
yeah, that's correct.
Okay, next question from Nadia from Sweden. Do I have to speak Arabic to get to land a good job in a family office? Is it necessary, or how would any Arabic knowledge or notions, would that help?
Would it help? Yes. Do you need to speak Arabic? No. I would say, half maybe of my placements into the family office space will speak Arabic. It's always nice, as I mentioned to you before, when we were talking about,
cultural understanding.
Cultural understanding, where you can align with somebody and kind of build common ground. Naturally, if you speak the same language, it's the easiest way to do that. It's far from required. There might be some instances where a client will say to me, we only want to hire someone that speaks Arabic. Typically, that will be because, if you're going to be overseeing some of their portfolio companies or putting together investment memos or, putting together presentations for the investment committee, and they're all in Arabic, using the documents and then presenting the documents is going to be pretty much impossible if you can't. If you're not in a position where you're having to present or converse regularly in Arabic, then no, it's not required. It's always a nice to have. I think for every single role in this region, whether it's a family office or not, or whether you're, I don't know, if you're an accounts payable specialist and you don't really need to talk to anyone, even if you speak Arabic and someone else doesn't, I think if you put two profiles next to each other, the Arabic's always nice to have. But it's far from mandatory, and it won't restrict you from landing a role.
Interesting. Have you ever had the opposite request, finding a candidate who does not speak Arabic?
I can't say I've had that specific request. I have, excuse me, Moses, I'm just going to cough.
Yeah.
So I have requests from time to time for a specific language. So for example, I had a role with a bank, and they were looking for someone to join their kind of coverage team, specifically targeting, Russian clients is what they were after. So someone that spoke Russian was almost a prerequisite to the role. We see a few examples of that. I've had requirements for, a Mandarin speaker or whatever it might be. That certainly happens. I don't think there's ever been an instance where a client said, we don't want anyone that speaks Arabic.
Just you don't understand us when we were pissed at them.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, we see all sorts of different requirements there, but not ever excluding.
When it comes to languages, is there any trends? You mentioned Russian and Chinese. We know the Russians and the Chinese are increasingly investing in the region. They are more present than maybe 10 years ago. Do you see, is there a trend? Are they looking for more Russian or Chinese speakers?
To be honest, no. I can't. Sorry,
I made you talk too much. Too many questions.
I know. I'm coming off the back end of a cold, and I'm also speaking loads. I can't say no. I can't say that I've seen a specific trend for Russian or Chinese. A lot of the time, English or Arabic are generally very well accepted. If you can speak fluent English, regardless of where you're from, your language is unlikely to therefore be a result of you or unlikely to cause you not to land a role, unless there's a specific requirement for that role. And it depends on the position as well, right? So if you're if you're in a non-client facing position, language is less important. I think generally there's always going to be an expectation for at least English, unless you're in a really domestic Arabic firm.
It's a given now.
Exactly. But outside of that, if you wanted to land a role as a fundraiser, as I mentioned before, and your task is to go out into the market and meet with sovereign funds and meet with allocators that are all in the GCC and will probably be speaking Arabic, particularly in Saudi. Generally, it's going to be tougher for you if you're not, if you're not able to speak the same language.
Especially Saudi,
So there's always nuances, but generally speaking, language doesn't come into play too much unless there's a specific reason.
Yeah, interesting. Peter from Germany, I'll give you some time to drink your water. What's one overlooked CV element that instantly signals a candidate's leadership potential? Not just job titles, what details actually grab attention?
It's a good question. To answer that question almost in reverse, and I'm not dodging the question, let me know if I should expand on this, but you would be surprised at how many people don't include the basics of what they do on their CV.
Really?
I'll maybe ping these across to you if it's of any use. I've done another LinkedIn post on exactly this.
Yeah.
If you've managed a team of 10 people, please include very early on in your job description that you've done that. If you've been investing, into GCC-based real estate investments, please make it very clear that you've done that if that's your main responsibility. I think a lot of the time people somehow oversee the kind of main core aspects of what makes them an attractive candidate, right? And I think you become so normal, the terminology you might use day to day with your colleagues becomes so normalized to you that actually someone else is reviewing that information. It's exactly. People oversee that information. It's really important. So I think, if you have managed a team of 10, make that really blatant. I think a CV, I'm a true believer that a CV should just be really simple, basic and traditional. I really love seeing just a black and white CV, that explains in X, Y, and Z what someone's been doing. It doesn't
have to be fancy, colorful, like Canva style.
No, it doesn't need to be 6 pages long. It doesn't need to have yellow highlights and red borders and a logo. We see it a lot. People like to, I'm not sure why, but sometimes next to their company name, they like to put the logo of the business. And it adds nothing. I always tell people, and I always advise the candidates that we work with, just copy and paste the text, change it to black and paste it into a new document, and I promise you it looks 100 times better. And there's all sorts of examples of pie charts of years. I've seen pie charts with their years of experience to make 100%. I've seen timelines with done this in 2014 and this in 2018. And it looks great if it was a presentation, but I can promise you that on a CV, it adds no value whatsoever. So I hope that's answered the question indirectly, which is that I think just make sure you've got a really clear-cut, traditional black and white CV that bullet points really firmly what you've been doing. That might sound patronizing to a lot of people, and a lot of people have a great CV. Maybe the person that asked that question already does, in which case I'm happy to dive into more detail around his question. But I think just stick to the basics and make it very clear what you've been doing. And if that's managing a team, make that towards the top of the page, in the second or third line of your job description, and everyone will know that's what you've done. I don't think it needs to be any more complicated than that.
Maybe it would be helpful to put yourself in the position of the recruiter or the family office. Like say, ask yourself, how can I give him a realistic profile? If he needs somebody who can manage people, then I need to, if the role is for management, for example, then I need to tell him how many people I've managed, what were the tasks that were required from me, right? Okay, another question about the photo. We were talking just to finish this, to end this question. Should they add a picture of themselves on the CV?
No, unless it's specifically asked for. But I've never had an example. I've had people tell me before it has been, which again is a bit odd, to be honest with you. But the answer is no. 99% of the CVs that I receive do not have a photo. And actually, for what might be interesting for people to know is obviously because I represent ultimately the client that I'm mandated by, right? And with every single CV that we share to our clients, we format that CV into our own format anyway. So if you build your CV with different colors and graphs and photos and this and that, we're going to remove all of it and just put it into black and white and put it into an Oneira Talent template, and that will go to the client. What we don't want, again, to your point around putting the candidate putting themselves into the recruiter's shoes, for a client to pay us sometimes what are quite significant fees to receive an email with, 10 different multicolored, different formatted and different text CVs.
Could have done in Sims. Yeah, of course.
Exactly. So we like to keep things uniform. I always tell candidates, look, this CV is going to be formatted. They're usually actually quite grateful for that because it looks quite nice in the template that we have. But point being, it adds no value to have the pictures and the colors and all this sort of stuff, particularly for a recruiter.
Yeah. So as a candidate, your main job is to make it to the recruiter, get him to notice you, select you, and then you become a product that the recruiter is keen to sell to the family office or to the entity that's looking for people, right?
100%. Yeah, 100%. I think, if I was a candidate, I think, as I mentioned on the question around the guy from the US, the best thing you should be doing is just trying to build relationships. I completely appreciate, and I'll be the first to hold my hand up, sometimes it's difficult to get through to recruiters. I've been there myself. Now that I run my own recruitment business, I completely understand the challenge on the flip side, which is that sometimes, Moses, I'll log on to my LinkedIn in the morning and I'll have 400 connection requests and there's a message on every single one, plus the messages from the day before, and suddenly having a 10-minute coffee or a 5-minute phone call actually is really difficult. So I completely get it. And all I would ask is that, you continue, in my particular case, continue pestering me, please. Make sure I know your name, and ultimately building a relationship will be the route to success. What I would also not recommend on the flip side is applying to every single job that you see on LinkedIn. I do not recommend. I could name you right now, and I hope this doesn't come across in the wrong way to people listening to this. I can name you probably at least 2 names of people that will apply to every single role that I post on LinkedIn, whether it's a CEO or an accountant or a salesperson.
That reflects very badly on the person, obviously.
Yeah, and I think, again, to my point about building a relationship, it completely dilutes my understanding of what you're looking for.
Lack of self-knowledge as well, right? It shows you as a recruiter that person doesn't know who he is, who or she
exactly. Is. Yeah. And to be fair, it does make your name sometimes memorable, because I think I've seen that name again. Yeah. But unfortunately, for some, maybe rememberable for the wrong way is the wrong word to phrase it, because no candidate is ever, there's no wrong way to communicate. I appreciate trying to grab attention and ultimately form the start of a relationship, and we do. We have conversations with these people, of course. Yeah. But my point is, you want to have a really strategic, targeted approach to how you're going to land your role. And I think position yourself almost as a business owner and think, right, what can my strategy be from day one? And then how can that snowball? I think day one, as I mentioned, is reaching out to a handful of recruiters, maybe through LinkedIn, maybe through email, just a multi-channel approach to at least trying to build the foundation of those relationships. Jump on a few phone calls here and there. Some of them might be more responsive than others. Over time, that relationship will nurture. Hopefully, you've also built your own relationships across the Middle East by that point. Connect with people across your industry. Whenever a candidate reaches out to me and I can see they're connected to 150 people already in Dubai, I think it's always a positive sign. It shows they're serious about the move. Maybe they've already got a network that can be leveraged. So again, just basics that I think will certainly, they're not guaranteed to land you a role. Ultimately, this place is incredibly competitive. And for, every one role, there are probably 5,000 applicants. I'm making that number up, but it is competitive. But there are certainly basics and kind of, I think, obvious things that can be done from the start that will improve your chances of success. And I think optimizing is all you can really do until that perfect role comes your way and I have the role for you. Just optimizing your chance of being able to build relationships, improving, your CV, improving your profile, building your network, is highly recommended.
Can you share with us any funny anecdotes of somebody you've come across that really caught your attention in a witty, smart way?
Let me think. I'm sure there is one. There's not been any recently, which is why I'm having to think quite a lot. I will tell you a funny story. It might be in reverse to your question just there. So I was parking in my old building in Dubai a couple of years ago, and I'm not quite sure how, but I scraped a car, and it was a Porsche. So I managed to scrape the front of someone's Porsche, and I was like, that's not good. Anyway, so I left a note on this car, received a call the day later, and obviously, I was very apologetic, and I think the gentleman was quite frustrated. Long story short, we ended up chatting. I being a recruiter, I was too curious not to at least look him up on LinkedIn. I saw his car. I thought, who is this guy? Maybe we can somehow form some sort of connection there, or whatever.
Smart.
He turned out to be with one of the big consulting firms, and we maintained a relationship. And then actually he introduced me to one of his friends who's now become a client.
Oh wow! So it led to business.
Exactly. And the gentleman himself is also somewhat a candidate. He's not actively looking, but he's absolutely open to hearing about exceptional opportunities, and senior person. Ultimately, if he was to be placed, would absolutely be worthwhile for us. So that negative incident has hopefully it's turned into one positive and maybe one future positive. So there's always a chance to network, Moses.
That's amazing. I think that's a valuable advice to everybody out there. Actually, just to always look at the positive, the positive side of anything that happens to you, right?
Yeah.
Even if you run into crash your car, maybe it's a nice way to network. You never know, especially in that part of the world, right?
Exactly. You never know. I saw a quote before on Facebook or something that said it's one of the only places in the world where you can walk down the beach for 10 minutes and probably walk past about 30 millionaires, right?
Yeah.
And
that's crazy.
Networking perspective, it's like nowhere else in the world too. I know I've made this point several times throughout this conversation, but networking it's
everything.
Absolutely key, and probably the easiest place to do it. So if you're not doing it, you're massively missing out.
Of course. And I think that is we used to talk about the American dream, and I often say that the new dream is not the American dream, it's actually the GCC dream. And it's like, you have this mix between young population and entrepreneurial people from all over the world, put in one place, with, very highly ambitious people who are there to build and make a better living, and get ahead in life. So it's amazing, and it's very inspiring for anybody who really dreams big. How has Dubai changed you? George Sames in London, if you were to compare between these two people, in what ways do you think you've changed thanks to this experience and living there?
Yeah, for sure. So number one, I don't want to repeat the same point again. I think I've probably already done it 3 or 4 times, but I've completely understood the power of networking and the power of putting yourself out there and really, making an effort. And what that can reciprocate back is real. I think a lot of the time maybe it doesn't seem worthwhile or whatever. Trust me, if you have enough conversations and you're trying to meet the right people, eventually that will come back your way. And for me, that's through the form of clients. It's through I have 50 coffee requests a day, and obviously it's impossible for me to do all of those as well as run business as well as recruit. But I have to be a little bit selective and manage my time carefully. And I do meet people, and actually, the effort of meeting as many people as possible when I have time to has definitely paid back in terms of referral to someone who's referred me to someone who's then become a client who ultimately has become commercially worthwhile for the business, right? So I think the power of kind of putting yourself out there and networking has become incredibly obvious to me. That's number one. How else has Dubai changed me? I think it certainly opened my eyes. I think both Dubai as well as the process of launching Oneira has really opened my eyes to how, what's the best way to word this? How if you really have a plan and you really commit to that plan, and have an end goal in mind, and this is what I was referring to before, around a really strategic approach around how you're going to do something, you can make it work. Naturally, you know, it's kind of daunting for anyone to launch a business or to, you know, leave their job or try something new. And you know, I've been quite fortunate in that, you know, covered the same industry for quite some time, right? So been able to bounce off of people that I know and be introduced to new people and form a new network very quickly, which has allowed us to, you know, the business to be successful in a relatively short period of time. But my point being, I think if you have a desire to do something, and you're able to put together a really strategic plan around how you're going to do it, and you can explain to someone how it's going to be run rather than just try and wing it, you can genuinely make, you know, anything work to a degree. And I'm not just talking about myself, I'm talking about the whole, I suppose, entrepreneurial and business mindset of Dubai, as you mentioned. I think given the nature of Dubai, you come across you know, a lot of people running their own businesses, or people that are you know, really driving growth within a business they might work for, really kind of, you know, hungry, motivated people that naturally, as a result, hopefully end up becoming successful people. And it's again that snowball effect. So what has Dubai taught me? It's definitely, you know, if I was to say to myself maybe a couple of years ago, if I was considering, if I started a year earlier, talking to someone else in that position, I'd say 100%. Make sure you have a plan and go for it. And I think that's something I've learned from being here and seeing other people do that. Is that real mentality of you know, getting it done and really strategically approaching something. Of course, you have that in every country, and back home I know people that have launched businesses, but I think there's certainly a you know, it's like it's on steroids in Dubai. It's around you, which has certainly changed my mindset, which is really valuable.
So it wasn't part of your plan when you left to London? Was it part of your plan to start a business, or were you inspired once you got to Dubai? You were like, okay, I need to start a business sooner or later.
It's a combination of a few things. So I've always wanted to run my own business. And if anyone was to say to me, why did you launch Oneira Talent? I've got I suppose, my professional answer, which is of course absolutely true, and all the reasons why I wanted to run a recruitment business differently and what I thought was missing from other businesses. And I'm now applying that. But there is a part of me, Moses, that was kind of like, I now have a skill set, and now I'm in a position to launch a business and leverage that skill set, which maybe back when I was in the UK, I didn't feel like I had. So I'd always wanted to run my own business. And so once I had the opportunity to do that, and by the opportunity, I mean, you know, I'd built a network in this region over a few years. I understood how the recruitment industry worked. I was confident in myself that I could very quickly get things off the ground and, you know, make the business successful through, again, networks and just, I suppose, again, that strategic approach and knowing exactly what I was going to do is a large reason why that happened. So yeah, it was always something I'd planned, and here we are.
Yeah, that's amazing. So what makes for a successful recruiter, a successful recruiting company? There are many out there. Were to give maybe 3 top traits for such a person or such a company, what would that be?
For sure. So number 1 is activity. So the recruiter, generally, a lot of the time, the reason it's so difficult to get through to recruiters is because they are genuinely incredibly busy, because a large part of being a successful recruiter is your activity in terms of kind of outbound activity to clients, in terms of interaction with candidates. It's a people business. So a lot of our work comes through conversation. So, you know, if I speak to 2 or 3 clients a day and I talk to, I don't know, 10 to 15 candidates a day, that's, you know, if I have time to talk to 15, if it's not such a busy day, that leads to, it leads to conversation, which leads to introductions, and the kind of snowball effect of all of that activity is that we get insights on, so we just heard this guy just interviewed here, and we know they're now hiring, and we can maybe approach them and offer our services. Or I speak to a CIO and hear that actually company X, Y, and Z from the US has just registered in the DIFC, and they're going to be landing over the next couple of months. So
Do you take notes? Like, how do you map it? Do you have like you're like a bit like an investigator, right? Like a detective. You have like
a little bit
on the wall.
A little. Yeah, I mean, we try our best to. We
Yeah.
try our best to map it in a relatively tidy way, but that element of recruitment can be quite scrappy. It's almost, as you said, it's almost investigating through conversation, right? And maybe investigating is the wrong word, but it's kind of the osmosis of understanding the market through talking to everybody. If I talk to, I would like to think I'm in a position where I can give a call to the chief investment officer or the CEO of many of the asset managers or private equity firms here. You have enough of those conversations each week. You really know what's going on in the market, right? And I know which business maybe isn't doing so well and might be on the way down soon, and which one's
even
coming
sectors,
up.
right?
Exactly.
Like you get a sense of what sectors are hot and or on the rise, right? Because they are recruiting.
Exactly. Asset allocation as well. So we see trends, where our business is actually investing. What are the trends? If you're a family office, what asset classes are these guys investing into, and in what region? And you start to pick that up, and that then allows you to have really in-depth conversations with candidates. And I can speak to a CEO and say, look, I've got this great opportunity for you, and I can talk his language because I know that private credit's booming, and I know that this asset's not doing so well, and I know that this company just invested into this, and it creates a real sense of credibility. You genuinely know what's happening in the market. So activity is a very broad umbrella term, but that's absolutely key. If you're a recruiter that's just sat waiting for a client to give you a role and then go and find a couple of candidates for it, it's really hard to stay on top of the market and where you should be looking, and know whether you should start pivoting more to Saudi because suddenly you've heard everyone's going to Saudi, or maybe the UAE quieting down, which is not, by the way. But that's absolutely key. So that's the first thing. Was the question around how to be a successful recruiter? Is that? Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Like top 3 skills. So like so far we've talked about. It sounds like you have to be a very good listener, right? Detective skills. So you need to be able to, analytical skills because you need to analyze the market based on what you've listened to. I guess you need to be very social. Like, you have to be top notch. You need to know, understand people and know how to deal with them, because I guess people are different. Talking to a family office is not the same as talking to somebody working in a bank or somebody working somewhere else, right? So far we have like 2 skills: social skills, listening skills, detective skills, the mix of both. Any other skills you think we might have not mentioned that are really necessary?
Partly related to one of the points you made there, which is I suppose the ability to be quite diverse. Despite the fact we cover a specific industry, within that industry there can be quite a lot of nuance to different roles and different verticals. I might put down the phone to a head of real estate investments who's allocating capital from a family office into, I don't know, shopping malls in Riyadh, and then 5 minutes later you're picking up the phone to a hedge fund manager who's trading trading commodities in Asia, right? And I think being diverse enough to have those different conversations and understand different people's requirements and different people's industries, you end up becoming, at the start in recruitment, you end up becoming someone who knows a little about a lot, right? You can kind of have a conversation with most people from different industries about some aspect of what they do, and over time you hopefully start to know a lot about a lot, and you can have really in-depth conversations. And I think that's really where you snowball, and you can start to build your credibility and build your network even further. But I think being able to be quick on your feet and diverse and being able to pivot is really important.
And you become in the process. It's very exciting to be. You become a learning machine, right? Because you end up like learning so much about many different sectors, about people, about positions, about how things work around you. I think we're going to need a part 2, and we need to continue this conversation because I believe it's very useful, especially in these times. People are moving from Europe, from America. They are looking for new places. The platform where we work often on, LinkedIn, for example, there's a lot of people out there who are confused because they don't know how to reach the right recruiters. businesses that are looking as well to find the right people, and they don't necessarily always find each other. So conversation with someone smart as yourself, George, I think is going to interest a lot of people out there. So let's say this was the first episode of many, I hope. And is there anything I should have asked you today that I haven't? Or anything you would like to share with us?
I don't think so. I think the final point I would make to anyone, again, looking to looking to come to the region, is just to emphasize on the opportunity here. Again, it's not easy to land a role here. That's the first thing I'll say. And if I was to take the ratio of candidates that reach out to me compared to the ratio of candidates that we can then successfully place, of course we place as many people as we possibly can. But the challenge with the Middle East from a candidate's perspective is that it's a very international market. When I was recruiting for Japan, for example, 99.9% of the time, if we have a mandate in Tokyo, we're going to find someone from in Tokyo, right? And they're probably going to be Japanese. In Dubai, if we have a mandate, depending on the role, you could come from the UK, you can come from the US, you can come from somewhere in Europe,
Australia.
You could already be in the Middle East. Some clients will have a really specific idea of what they want, which makes it easier for us. But suddenly, if you're competing against the rest of the world, it's the competition sometimes is wild. Yeah. So in that case, for some roles where again the criteria might be a little bit too broad from the client, for example, we'll try and advise on that and narrow things down so we can be a little bit more focused. And then all of a sudden you might be the needle in the haystack that we're looking for. But as I said, I think consistency around building your network is absolutely key. The ADGM and the DIFC are absolutely bursting, at the seams with new entrants, new asset managers, new family offices. The market is so unbelievably hot, and you see again on the news ups and downs in the market and global economics and politics, and we spoke about obviously what happened in Qatar, and naturally those things will always have some sort of knock-on effect. But the general trajectory is that all businesses seem to want to come to the Middle East, and naturally that creates more and more roles and more opportunity, and the same for Saudi Arabia. So if you're set on wanting to make a move, I can only suggest that you stay very consistent with your make sure you have your LinkedIn updated, take my advice on the CV, reach out to as many recruiters as possible. I actually if he's listening, he'll know exactly who I'm talking about. But I placed a gentleman this morning who's currently in Saudi Arabia, but we've been speaking for 2 years, and the right role hadn't really come up, and we've just placed him. So that's an extreme example. Hopefully it's not going to take anyone here 2 years.
But perseverance, right?
Stayed very perseverant, and every time I had a role that was remotely associated to the same title, he'd give me a call. And we've landed the role that he's going to start in a couple of weeks. So
is he from the region or from outside of the region, if I may ask?
From the UK.
From the UK. Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. My point is,
2 years.
I create the impression that everyone has to wait 2 years. But again, it's tough competition. There are limited roles for a very large pool of candidates. I think it's just about, again, making sure you're getting yourself in front of the right people, maximizing your chances, maximizing the opportunity, optimizing where you can in terms of LinkedIn, CV, outreach, conversations, and don't expect overnight results, particularly coming from overseas. I do see some posts on LinkedIn, maybe from some of my competition, mentioning that it should only take maybe a month to land a role. In some instances, yes, maybe in different industries, I've had roles and then placed someone within 2 weeks. But generally speaking, if you're not seeing or interviews immediately, please don't panic. It's a tough market to, it's competitive, but the opportunity is absolutely there. So please reach out to me. And if I miss your message the first time, just keep messaging me. And I hope that's all been useful.
That's awesome. I'll put your coordinates under the video everywhere with the episode. Thank you so much, George. I love the energy, and you sound like a very smart recruiter, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you, Moses. Yeah, I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks.